But don't worry, we've got a really interesting one coming next week, which is Syrup Village. I honestly have no idea what I'm going to say on that video, but I'll figure it out, so make sure to watch that video when it comes out. Okay, so I may have actually been wrong about this, because upon a reread, there's actually so much geography to discuss here. So buckle in, because in today's episode of One Piece Geography 101, we're going to be talking about the geography of Syrup Village, everyone's favorite One Piece arc. Alright, so last time in One Piece Geography 101, we talked about the geography of the island of rare animals, which is Gaimon's Island, of course, and we talked about the use of biogeography in storytelling in One Piece, and about the importance of considering the relationships between islands and the world around them for world building in this story, because geography is not just about the physical geography of specific locations, but also about the relationships between all these different locations spread all over the world in One Piece. And this is a concept that I once again want to forefront in this video, because it will be super important to demonstrate why Syrup Village fulfills an essential role in the East Blue, and that it helps to also contextualize not just its own story, but also the geography and the stories of the other islands that we've been to so far. But first, let's talk about the physical geography of Syrup Village. Syrup Village is located in the Gecko Islands, which is an archipelago located between the island of rare animals and Bear Tea on the East Blue. It has a very similar aesthetic to Fuchsia Village, which is Luffy's hometown, and that is because Oda drew inspiration from the classic English rural landscape aesthetic for both of these locations. And because of this, Syrup Village has a very simple geography. It is surrounded by grasslands, hills, and forests, with Kaya's mansion being kind of like the focal point of the village, because there really isn't that much of like a notable architecture there, apart from the restaurant that Usopp took Luffy and the gang to at the very start of the arc, which is called Meshi, which for those of you who are unaware means food or meal in Japanese. The only other notable feature is that Syrup Village is on an island which has a pretty kind of cliff covered perimeter, so the only real way to enter the village is through two passageways, one on the south and one to the north. And of course, as we know, a lot of the arc takes place in between these passageways. And that's about it. There's really not like a very extensive physical geography to Syrup Village, which once again is something that can be said about every single island that we've been to so far in the East Blue. But Syrup Village marks a bit of a departure from all the other places in that it uses the simplicity to its advantage. And this is because, as I mentioned earlier, geography is not just about the physical geography of individual locations, but about the relationships between different locations. So first, at a micro level, so at the level of Syrup Village, because we see the characters moving so much from one place to another, and because the characters themselves tell us about the distances between all these different places. For instance, Usopp mentions that the distance between the southern passageway into the island and the northern passage is about 3 minutes by running. Syrup Village is actually the first location in East Blue where you could sort of picture like a rough map, a rough layout of what Syrup Village looks like. And this is something that I don't think I could really say about previous locations that we've been to so far. And it is thanks to this that Syrup Village actually has a more nuanced and kind of like lived in feel. Like it feels like an actual location that you could feel and touch and see yourself in. This then leads me to my second point. That is because we have a much more informed geography, that Oda is able to, for the first time really so far in the story, to use geography in combat, which is of course a cornerstone of battles in One Piece later in the story. As we know in a lot of later arcs, Oda likes to include mini-maps in a lot of different chapters to tell us where characters are at different points in time in battle, so as to give a more geographic component to his storytelling. And we don't really have a minimap in this case, but what we do have is a use of geography in strategy and tactics. So of course Usopp had an original strategy to stop Captain Kuro, which was to cover the passageway on the south of the island with a bunch of oil to prevent Kuro's pirates from making their way up to the village. And of course what happened is that Kuro's pirates actually attacked from the northern shore, so our characters had to run up to the northern shore, and then of course the final decisive battle occurred there. Now this may sound really simple, but this really marks the start of a pattern in One Piece, as more and more we see Oda use the setting in which the story occurs to not just tell a story, but to also tell a battle and to give it more nuance and complexity. And one of the ways in which this occurs in Syrup Village is the geography of the final battle between Luffy and Zoro Zoro and Nami and Usopp and Kuro and his pirates is thematically relevant. Notably, the fact that Captain Kuro is fighting at the very top of the passageway, whilst his subordinates are at the very bottom just getting fucking massacred by Kuro and by Luffy and by everyone else, is telling of the fact that Kuro sees himself as being above everyone else in his crew. So when Luffy is first knocked down to the bottom of the passage and then climbs his way back up to tear Kuro a new one, it is a literal like geographic allegory of the fact that Kuro isn't really at the top and that he's actually a really shitty captain. And this is Luffy essentially telling us through his words, but also through the literal physical geography on which this battle is occurring, that Kuro's idea of what a pirate is and of what a pirate captain is are wrong, which is of course a message that we have seen before in previous arcs, notably in Orange Town, and that Oda keeps on developing more and more throughout the East Blue. Third, not only does Oda create a more complex geography within Syrup Village that consists of a web of relationships between places and people, but he also does this beyond Syrup Village and onto the rest of the East Blue, and this is the arc where this really starts to happen. Up until now, Oda has drawn relationships between the islands in which we are and the wider world of One Piece. A good example is the previous island in which we were in, which is the island of rare animals, where Oda introduces us the concept of the red line and explains what the grand line is. But you know, we can't really see a tangible relationship between the island of rare animals and the other islands in the East Blue through the grand line, because the grand line is so far removed from everything else. However, in Syrup Village, we actually see Oda start building relationships between this island and every other single island that we've been to beforehand, which is of course something that is very, very common in modern One Piece. And he does this in three ways. The first is that this is the arc where Oda finally starts using cover stories. So up until this point, Oda had just been using the cover pages and chapters to show cute little illustrations of Luffy and the gang doing a bunch of shenanigans, but here we get the first ever cover story in One Piece, which is the one about Buggy post Orange Town and you know what he gets up to, and he eventually meets up with Gaimon on the island of rare animals. So we start seeing a development of parallel storylines throughout One Piece, beyond just the main text, which is, you know, like the meat of the chapter, and of the fact that, you know, One Piece really is a living, breathing world that goes just beyond Luffy and the Straw Hats. Second, we learned that Usopp is Yasopp's son, which is of course a character that we met all the way back in chapter 1 in Romance Dawn, and if you actually go back to that very first chapter, you will notice that Oda actually very intentionally labeled Yasopp, despite him not really doing much in that first chapter, by putting his name on his bandana on his forehead. So at this point, 30-40 chapters into One Piece is where we as readers really start to notice the intentionality of Oda's storytelling, and that he plans these things way in advance as a way of tying different parts of the story together and creating a more complex story. In this instance, Oda creates a very tangible relationship, not only between Orange Town and the Island of Rare Animals, as we saw 2 minutes ago, but also between Fuchsia Village and Syrup Village. And this creates a much more believable bond between Luffy and Usopp through Yasopp and Shanks. And this then makes it much more justifiable for the reader when Usopp eventually joins the crew. And the final way in which this contextualization occurs is that, and this actually surprised me a lot when I was rereading this arc, during Kuro's backstory, we learn that Kuro escaped piracy by having Django hypnotize a then simple-as Navy soldier, Captain Morgan, who were first found all the way back in Shellstown, which is where we first met Zoro, and having him believe that he actually caught the real Captain Kuro and turning him into the authorities such as to gain the role of captain. And this is a pretty inconsequential detail that Oda could have just chosen not to include, but in my eyes it does so much legwork, because it means that the drama in Shellstown is directly tied to the drama in Syrup Village, meaning that the two islands are connected in a way that we would just not have thought of before, which makes them more interesting, more complex, more relevant to the wider story of the East Blue, and it makes the reader think moving forward that, like, okay, if this could happen now, right, such a like insignificant little detail actually being so important, that, you know, we've got to pay a lot more attention when we're reading One Piece, because eventually later on similar things are going to start happening again, where Oda is going to draw back on things that happened way back and bring them into a current storyline so as to tie the entirety of One Piece's story together. And that to me is so reminiscent of modern One Piece and what we love about later arcs in One Piece, particularly from Alabasta onwards, as Oda really kind of like starts to, you know, get into the groove of like what his style of storytelling is. So yeah, that's it for the geography of Syrup Village. And I'm actually wondering, has this information changed your opinion of Syrup Village as an arc at all? Or not, in a good way or in a bad way? Because for me personally, Serve Village has never been high up on my rankings, and it still isn't, but rereading the arc and considering this more geographic component has actually made me like it a lot more than I originally did, and that's not something that I thought to be possible, so I would be really interested to see what you guys think about this. But beyond that, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, comment, and to subscribe and hit the little notification button on the side so you're notified whenever I upload new videos like this one. This has been pascuagon, and I am out.